Well, hello folks. Join me today as we drill 200 wells in the Permian Basin with GVERSE Field Planner, and I'll take you through this webinar and the workflows. As you know, I like to show you the end result in the very beginning. We're going to have a field and we're going to populate that entire field with over 200 wells, and we're going to do it in several minutes. We can also take into account blocks, drilling windows or blocks, as some of you might use in your workflows. Today we're going to be drilling in the Permian Basin. This is a very hot zone west of Texas. It's been hot for a couple of years here. And specifically, we are going to drill in the upper Wolfcamp regions, as shown over here. So what's new in GVERSE Field Planner 2017.3? This has been one of our biggest releases yet because we are able to do intelligent full field planning. This is not doing one well at a time. This is specifying an area, a field if you will, and plotting several hundreds of wells within minutes. But not only that, we are also taking things into account. We are taking the surface hazards, the subsurface hazards, your existing wells in the area where you don't want to drill new wells, your lease areas. Included are the drilling windows as you saw in the video, and also the costs. We're going to give you a rule of thumb cost calculations. So let me take you through a workflow. I think this will be easier before I get to the demo. What I'm about to show you is what I'm going to show you in the demo, but this way you'll get a better grasp if I show it to you over here. In the beginning, we start off with the surface hazards. So we have a map with a couple of wells drawn over here, but it's a relatively empty map of the Permian. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take into account the slope, the terrain hazards. These are areas where you can't put a pad because the slope is too great. And you'll notice when I do this and I take that from the digital elevation model file, you'll notice these blue or violet spots in the areas. We can't place pads there. Now, we can also use custom hazard polygon shapefiles. If you have certain locations where you can't drill, that's not a problem. Just go ahead and put those as shapefiles and we will take those into account. Third, your existing wells on the surface. Let's say there's a Christmas tree sticking out, you can't put a pad there. Not an issue. We take those into account and you'll notice you have the little circle buffers. Next step are the subsurface hazards. Okay, so subsurface hazards, this is the way we do them. We take your target surface where you want to drill your well and we put buffers around it. You specify what buffer you want above and below the surface. Then if the well goes through those buffers, that well is going to be in the subsurface hazard region. So we're going to put these hazard buffers around that well. That means when we do full field planning, we're not going to put a new lateral through that region because there's going to be collision. So in this example, we select existing wells in the field, wells that have already been drilled using well-based filters. Pretty simple stuff. We see those wells over here, 4 wells here, 4 wells here, and 4 wells here. And now, if they do meet that hazard restriction, we're going to put buffers around them, and they're going to be considered hazards, where we cannot put new laterals. All right, let's take a look at lease areas. We create lease areas from shapefiles. You can import your shapefiles quite easily. So you see a shapefile over here. And we can add or remove tracts. These are areas that we're going to use for field planning. These are the allowed areas. You can also put in custom setbacks on any side you want. For example, over here you have some custom setbacks set here. You can even put them internally. That's not an issue. This is the way you create drilling blocks also. And finally, everything gets updated on the map. Take a look. On the left-hand side, you see the gray area, and on the bottom, you see the gray area. These are the lease boundaries. Next step is the geometry. We're going to use GVERSE Field Planner in order to set up the geometry, the minimum, the maximum amount of wells. And I'll go through this as we go through the actual workflow in the program. But realize that you can set most of the geometry within GVERSE Field Planner. And finally, we generate a field plan. So here's your map before we generated the field plan. We have the subsurface hazards, we have the polygons, we have the surface hazards in terms of slope that are very small over here. And we run the simulation and it gives us a cost calculation. You'll also see how many pads are placed as the simulation runs through iterations. You'll see how many wells are placed and the length and the cost in millions. And you have 200 well bores in 2 minutes, and the result looks like this. You'll notice that we automatically cut off all the wells so they don't cross the boundaries, they're spaced properly, and they use all of our internal configurations for geometry. In addition, they don't get planned where our existing wells are located, which is in these zones right here. Finally, you have a nice 3D view in Pro3D. Let me show you what the drilling windows are. So drilling windows you can definitely use here. I used Lease Planner. I made these drilling windows. The gray areas are areas that where we can't drill. The areas that are visible are the drilling windows where we can drill. So I go ahead and I run the simulation, right? Everything's okay. Except what about these areas? What about these areas? They're left alone. Well, we can fix that by putting in custom azimuths to any of these drilling blocks. Once we do that, voila, we have this. All right, folks, let's go ahead and see all of this in action. Let's take a look at the actual demo. So we have GeoAtlas open. This is the Permian Basin, and let's go ahead and go through the workflow. So the first thing we're going to do is create the surface hazards, which are found right over here. Dialog opens. Let's give it a name. And we're going to select the digital elevation model file. All right, so we're going to give a Z factor because this is in meters. We want to convert it to feet, but if everything is in 1 units for you, you don't have to do that. Now for here, for slope, we're going to provide a slope of 7 degrees. That means if the slope anywhere is over 7, it's going to be considered a hazard zone on the surface. If it's less, it's going to be okay. We add that and we click OK. And it'll generate the surface hazards. As you can see, they're located right over here. They're just very small to see right now, but if I zoom in, I can definitely see them. These are areas where we cannot place pads on. All right, if I zoom out and I go back in and I update this layer, let's go ahead and add our hazard shapefiles. Here it is, and I'm going to give it a setback of 200 feet around it. Click Add and Update. And what you'll notice is that we have these hazard zones where we can't put pads either. Finally, let's go back in and we're going to add buffers around our surface points. To do that, select the well base layer. We want to use the hazard wells, and I'm going to give this a value of 200. Click OK, click Update. And if I zoom in, you'll see that those surfaces now have buffers where we can't place pads on. All right, let's go to the second step. The second step is to create subsurface hazards. Click on hazards again, go to subsurface hazard layer. And we're going to select the well base layer we want to use for this, which are the hazard wells that we already have. We're going to choose the Wolf Camp isomap layer and give it a top and a bottom offset. Let's give the top 250 feet buffer, bottom same thing, and the buffer of 200 feet. And there we go. Those wells are within those buffer zones, so therefore you see the selected lateral buffers around them where we can't place the laterals. All right, step number 3, we're going to create lease areas. Click on Lease Planner from here, and we're going to create a new one. And let's go ahead and import the shapefile. And it's right here. So I'm going to go ahead and make it pretty simple for us. I'm going to select the entire area, and I'm going to add the tracts with a setback of 250 feet all around. Now, if you wanted internal tracts, you can always click this button right here, and it'll build internal setbacks. This is good. I wanted to show you that you can very well select any of these setbacks. Even the ones in the middle you can select, and you can change their values. Modify setback, You can say 400 feet. And as you can see, it modifies it. So that is very customizable. Click update. And our map updates. As you can see, the gray areas are the areas that we don't own. They're not our setbacks. The visible areas are areas where we can drill. We have to make sure that we don't go past the visible areas into the gray areas. And now we're ready to plan our wells by launching Field Planner. This is the Field Planner core, but today we're going to look at GVERSE Field Planner. Field Planner core is pad by pad planning. GVERSE Field Planner is planning your entire field. So let's give it a new plan name. And there's quite a bit of options here. So I'm going to select a two-sided layout. In fact, I'm also going to space these wells 20 feet apart vertically and horizontally. I'll give it an azimuth of 350 feet. Give it a pad size of 3. Also, you can specify how many wells do you want per pad. You have the minimum and the maximum ranges for the algorithm to take into account. So for this, for the minimum, I'll put 2. And as a maximum, I want 10 wells per pad. Azimuth, kickoff depth, and we can go for well spacing of 400 feet. Lateral length, we're going to stick with 6,000 to 11,000, and step out 600 to 1,000. Lateral cost per 1,000 foot, I'm going to say $500,000, and fixed pad cost. Now, these are just rule of thumb calculations you can put in so that the algorithm then gives you a final calculation of what it might cost to produce the entire field. For your surface hazards layer, we just did that, and I'm going to select digital elevation model and your subsurface and our target surface, which is the wolf camp. Once we're done, we are going to build the plan. And now it's running it through the algorithm. As you can see, it's all iterative, and more wells get placed with time. So it's actually done. It ran through 1,000 iterations. You can always increase those numbers of iterations in GVERSE Field Planner. There's the result, but let me show you this. If you go to options, number of iterations can be increased. Look at all those pads that were placed. And there you have it, the entire field populated. Let me make it a little bit easier to see this just by changing the layer display attributes. Let's make the well pads visible. Click OK. And there's the result. So notice how our wells are automatically cut off to the lease lines. Also notice that our laterals don't go through the hazard wells. They actually avoid those areas. They're optimally placed to optimize for lateral length in this entire field. Now, how many wells did we place? Well, we can go back to the statistics over here. We placed 252 wells with this length, with this millions of dollars cost, with 40 pads created. Once you're done with this, you can also ask GVERSE Well Planner to create the deviation surveys for you automatically. Or you can do it manually by going into GVERSE Field Planner and doing it well by well, as you already know how. All of these new pads are easily editable if you go back to Field Planning Core, and you can edit them just like any other field plans that you used to create before. Now, remember I showed you the drilling windows, and you can do those as well. Let me show that to you real quick. So what we're going to do is close this well plan, and I'm going to open a plan that I already created. over here, blocks. I created this earlier. And here it is. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to rerun the simulation here. But what I will do is actually open up Lease Planner. And once that's opened up, you'll notice that here are my leases, and they all have these internal setbacks. That's because I selected this feature when I added the tracts. But in order to change the azimuth for each of these different blocks, all I do is just right-click here, say Modify Azimuth, and you notice I put an azimuth of 82. Now, all the remaining blocks do not have a changed azimuth because I want them all to be 350, except for these exceptions right here, where I can modify the azimuth, click OK, and update the layer, and then rerun the simulation. So what do you say we take a look at this entire thing in a 3D view? Let's go ahead and do that. This is the beauty. We go here. I'm going to select 3D regions as my well base layer. Go ahead and click on this Create 3D Region button and select the region you want to see in 3D. I want to see this. Give it a name. And from here, I'm going to launch Pro 3D. And here we go. Pro 3D is really powerful. It works with GeoAtlas. Any layers you have in GeoAtlas all get loaded in Pro 3D. So we have all our wells, our surfaces, our field plans included. So if I go ahead and I just scroll down, I zoom in a little bit, I'm going to get rid of some surfaces here. Get rid of this surface, get rid of this surface, and you see all these wells. What I'm going to do is actually drape the leases on this surface. You can drape any layers in GeoAtlas on these surfaces. So for this example, go ahead and put this on there. And as you can see, this is the result of our work with the drilling windows. Perfectly placed wells in the drilling windows that get cut off before they go outside the tracts. Now there's much more you can do with Pro 3D. I'm just showing this to you in the context of GVERSE Planner. Of course, you can put other wells, you can see well logs, you can see your prism templates in here as well. You can do microseismic here. You can do some spatial analysis of your production data. These wells are ready to be planned. If you do want to automatically plan these wells right away, you can do this. You can create well deviation survey, and it will create the entire survey, and your wells will all be planned once you build the plan. All right, folks, as you just saw, this has been a major release for us. A lot of new features, and especially this automated full field planning. Again, we take into account the surface hazards, the subsurface hazards, the existing wells that you have in the area, the lease areas, including the ability to drill within drilling windows, and we give you a rule of thumb on the costs, and all of this within minutes of planning several hundred wells.